So now, wrapping up the day, we have Abe Gong, who's coming in to talk about something. I've been filled in on the broad strokes of the topic, and I've been excited about this talk all day. But if you were to look at the back of your card, it's not what is on there, but it's something kind of close. So I'm not sure what he's talking about, but I know that Abe is, and I have great confidence in Abe and his ability to give us a really wonderful talk. So let's all welcome Abe to the stage and hear what he has to say about working with health data.
All right, ethics for powerful algorithms. I think it's awesome that I get to start off a conference presentation about ethics by coming in under false pretenses. So I submitted one talk as I went through and looked at what it would take to talk about working under HIPAA and doing good in the medical world, and also all these thoughts about ethics that have been swirling around. I realized there was no way to get them into one talk. So if you want to talk about HIPAA, then approach me afterwards. We can go to happy hour and talk HIPAA there, because I actually do that some of the time now. And for the moment, let's focus on ethics for algorithms. What I'm trying to do here is pick up a conversation that started at this conference last year. Claire gave an awesome talk on algorithmic harm that raised a lot of the issues about good algorithms that do bad things by mistake, or what is your word, Chris? You introduced a great term for this. I want to keep using it. Digital vulnerability. Yeah, these issues that have kind of been at the back of a lot of our minds for a while, but we haven't had good language or good practice for dealing with. So I want to come back to those themes and see if we can make some progress today as a community. So here's where we're going. First, I'm going to talk about algorithms as gatekeepers to opportunity. This is a frame that I've started to use in a lot of my work, and once you see it, you will see it all over the place. It's a big deal. The second is I want to raise the bar on what it means to build a good algorithm. Often when we evaluate good, we think of that in statistical terms, and I want to put that notion to rest. The bar for good needs to be higher. And then last, we'll have a call to action, a very specific call to action, something that you can do that I hope will affect your practice in powerful ways. Okay, gatekeeping. So if you want to buy a house these days, you will have a conversation with a loan broker that looks something like this. Hi, I would like a house. And they'll say, okay, great. Let me check your credit score, your employment history, punch some things into a computer, and you'll probably be on the phone with somebody, and there will be this moment where you hear them go quiet for a second while the computer hums and spits out a number. And that number will determine whether or not you have the opportunity to buy a house. It's not so different in education. In this case, it's not a loan broker, it's an admissions officer, and instead of being on the phone, you're going to be communicating by thick mail packets. But, hi, I would like a quality education. Okay, that's great. Let me check your SAT or ACT. Again, the algorithm here is making most of the decisions. The admissions officers, sure, they exercise some discretion, but the strong filter, the big cuts, are being made upfront digitally. Hi, I'd like a job. Okay, we're going to check your criminal history. If it's a low-paying job, they may also check an employability index. It depends on work history and credit score. If you want health care, you're going to have somebody who checks your rate based on all the data that they can throw at this. And my point here is, in life, there are going to be things that you want. You need someone else's help to get there. And if you need someone else's help, and it's an institution, that's someone, there will almost certainly be a risk model calling the shots on the other side. You might be talking to a person, although that's less and less the case, but a lot of the de facto gatekeeping is being done by algorithms, which means your opportunities in life are determined in a large part by computers. This isn't, let me steal a line from Claire here, this is not some vague theory about existential risks from AI. This isn't some possible dystopian future. This is the world we live in right now. An awful lot of the big opportunities that we care about as human beings are controlled by algorithms. Let me put faces on this. These are all people who lost their jobs in the last recession. And Time did a really good, man on the street set of interviews that talked about how losing their jobs forced people into home foreclosures, or medical bankruptcy, or severe depression. And in lots and lots of these life events, algorithms had a large role to play. Okay, if that's not heavy enough, let me up the stakes a little bit. This is a thing that Tim O'Reilly said 2 years ago that stuck with me, and I'm going to paraphrase. The first big wave of data science work was mostly focused on marketing and ad targeting. User-generated content, there are a lot of things that happened there, but mainly we were monetizing eyeballs and trying to direct attention to sell stuff. The second big wave of data science is starting now, and in this wave, you're not going to be able to just opt out by not clicking. This is going to be things like insurance. It's going to be the gig economy. We heard from Instacart this morning. It's going to be things like HR, we also heard about, where these are relationships that are already in place. You're not going to be able to opt out of the algorithm. It's going to have an influence on your life, whether or not you like it. And the point that I'd like to make there is, in market transactions, you can always step away. The stakes aren't necessarily super high. In these kinds of relationships, there are real stakes. It's a real power relationship. And these algorithms that we're building, they're not just predicting the future, they're actively influencing it. And when they do that, they become instruments of power, and they need to be evaluated differently. Let me give you what I think is maybe the most stark example. This is a deep dive that I've done over the last month or so. So if you're convicted of a crime, there will probably come a point where you have a conversation like this. Hi, I'd like to not be in prison anymore. And the judge, these days, will very likely use a predictive algorithm, including one called Compass, to decide whether or not you are fit for parole. So freedom is on the line here. Let's talk a little bit about how that actually works. So Compass is one of many predictive algorithms that's used in criminal justice today. It's a proprietary algorithm, so it's a black box that's built and maintained by a specific company. They don't share their code. It predicts recidivism. So that's the likelihood that you will commit another crime or actually be arrested again within some time frame, say 2 years. Compass itself is a survey that's based on 137 questions that you fill out as a convict, and your criminal caseworker will also fill out with you. And it's not officially used in conviction, so it doesn't hand out sentences, and it doesn't decide whether or not you're guilty, but it's often used for deciding whether someone will go to a minimum or a maximum security cell block, and it's very, very frequently used in parole hearings. So although it doesn't officially decide the length of your sentence, it might decide whether or not your sentence gets shorter, which means, in terms of algorithms as de facto gatekeepers, this algorithm might literally be shaping whether or not you get out of prison. Two months ago, an investigative reporting team from ProPublica published this article. It's a really good article. I'm going to disagree with some points that they make, but they say that there is software used across the country to predict future criminals. And then the kicker is, they claim it's biased against blacks. So let's as statisticians, let's evaluate that claim. Is it biased against blacks? As journalists, they go through and they do a lot of side-by-side comparisons. They find white people and black people, generally, who have committed similar crimes, and they point out that in a lot of cases, the risk scores that being given to whites are lower than the risk scores being given to blacks. So maybe that's bias, but we're at the level of anecdote here, right? This isn't statistics, this is just a few case studies. They also show that if you look at black defendants' risk scores, they tend to be higher than for white defendants. So over on the left, you have this skewed distribution, which shows that most white defendants have low scores. A few have high, but it shades towards the low end. And black defendants tend to be more uniform. So again, this shows that they're getting higher risk scores. This doesn't necessarily prove that there's statistical bias in the algorithm. So me being a gung-ho data scientist and also caring a little bit about citizen science, I went and fetched the data that ProPublica downloaded for all of this. So they issued a Freedom of Information request and got I think it was 18,000 criminal records and histories, and then the corresponding Compass scores for those people. They put that all on GitHub, which is awesome. And so in just a couple hours, I was able to download that and replicate their findings and come to exactly the opposite conclusion. So I don't want to turn this into a grad seminar, so we can talk about the statistics later if you want. But the main idea is if you look at a conditional risk plot for black versus white defendants in these cases, COMPAS scores are not racially biased. The probability that you will commit a second crime is accurately reflected in that COMPAS score. So there's this debate going on right now about whether or not COMPAS and algorithms like it are biased, and most of it is focused on this concept of statistical bias. I want to argue here that statistical bias is not the issue. This algorithm, at least, is clean there. It's built well. This is not junk statistics. It's good statistics. But that doesn't mean that the algorithm might not be deeply unfair. So just because it's statistically unbiased does not mean that it is capital G good. Let me show you 3 ways that that might be true. I'm sure you can think of others. So 1, biased ground truth. If you've been paying attention at all in American politics, you know that we have some racial issues and that they show up around policing. If, hypothetically, law enforcement is more likely to pursue and prosecute black defendants, then that would show up as more arrests for black suspects, which would show up as quote-unquote ground truth in this model, which means that even though it's a statistically unbiased estimator, it's a statistically unbiased estimator of a biased reality. So that would be bad. Second possibility, maybe some people have resources to cheat that others don't. We had a really good talk on malware and adversarial algorithms. Here are a few questions that are actually on this survey, and they're interesting, introspective questions. Things like, a hungry person has a right to steal. And you as a defendant are supposed to strongly agree to strongly disagree with that question. So setting the philosophy aside, there's a right and a wrong answer to this, right? If you say one thing, you will get a shorter sentence. And it's not too much of a stretch to think that maybe some criminals have access to lawyers who would coach them on this, and because they have access to those resources, they might get off with lighter sentences. The third one, and for me this is the one that is the most damning, the biggest problem, is circumstances outside your control. So here are 4 questions that are representative of a fairly large section on the COMPAS survey. One is, if you lived with both parents and they later separated, how old were you at the time? So that is a predictive question. Your answer to that question adds some weight to the likelihood that you'll commit a second crime. Was your father ever arrested that you know of? How many of your friends or acquaintances are taking illegal drugs regularly? In your neighborhood, have some of your friends or family been crime victims? So the thing that these all have in common is they predict future criminality, and they are absolutely outside your control. And from my moral standpoint, at least, it's not fair to punish somebody if someone in their family has been a victim of a crime in their neighborhood, even though that might predict their risk of committing a future crime. So for me, these questions highlight a deep underlying tension in values. If we want to build algorithms that are as predictive as possible, then sure, we should include things like this. But if we want our algorithms to reflect due process and moral culpability, things that we typically care about in criminal justice, then these things should not be on the table. So there's a deep, deep tension in what's right and what's wrong here, and the right way to build your algorithm. And the point that I want to make is, as statisticians and data scientists, it's really tempting to just maximize our AUC or R squared or C statistics. It's really tempting to just drive up accuracy because it can be measured. We're often being evaluated on our ability to do that, but sometimes that's not the right thing to do. Okay, let me do a Socratic facepalm here. I'm gonna mangle 2 great thinkers at the same time and try and encapsulate this idea. So all models are wrong, but some models are useful. Just because some models are useful does not guarantee that they are capital G good. It's a higher bar. Let me put that in the inverse. Being statistically valid is a necessary but insufficient condition for being a good, morally upright model. And I don't know about you, but when I was in grad school and was taught statistics, this was not taught to me. there was a lot of emphasis on prediction and statistical unbiasedness and very rigorous thinking around how you validate data against data. But there was really not much discussion about what happens when you build an algorithm that goes into the real world and starts actually determining outcomes for people, when it in itself becomes a powerful thing. The ethics for predicting the world, in the abstract, hypothetically, I think are very different from the ethics of allocating resources and punishing people and opening or closing doors to opportunity. And we're doing that. We're doing that at the scale of millions and millions of people, and I think we should take it seriously. So here's my call to action. This is a really simple thing. This is a thing that I think we should all be doing. Conduct an ethics review. And here's what I mean by that. 3 steps. Find a friend, someone you can talk to about that algorithm that you just built, or that data pipeline, or that data product, whatever it is that you're doing in your work. Before you release it, find somebody who you can talk to for, say, half an hour. This is not a big ask. Talk through 4 questions with them, and I'll show you the questions that I think are most on point. And then at the end, share something that you learned, and share it with the broader community. So let's talk about those 4 questions. The first question that we should be asking is, are the statistics solid? Is it accurate? Is it unbiased? Does this meet good statistical practice? How many of you, before you've released an algorithm, have done something like that before, where you've done a review and said, how good is it? Hands high? Okay, so a lot of us. The second question is, if this thing is deployed in the real world, who gains and who loses? Hopefully, in a lot of cases, there are some real gains here. We're making life better for people. We're getting the right sorts of care to diabetics who might otherwise not have it. But is there some constituency, some third party, some other person who might be harmed by mistake in the process? The third is, are those changes in power structures healthy? So are we giving people new powers that they didn't have before that could potentially be abused? And then last, after taking moral stock of all of these things, there are probably going to be some potential harms. Are there things that we can do to mitigate them? Are there ways that we can carve some people out of the population so that they're not affected? Are there ways that we can give people more information or provide options for redress or reevaluation if somebody thinks that we've got it wrong? So let me ask another question. Who, and I think I know the answer on this, who's done a formal evaluation like this of an algorithm that they've launched? Hands? I'm seeing a couple, maybe sort of. Let me throw down the challenge here. This is half an hour. It's not a hard thing to do. You will feel better if you do it. And I say that having done this in public with the Data Guild guys a couple months ago. Can I get a commitment from everybody in the room that the next time you launch a data product, you will go through a process like this? It doesn't have to be exactly these questions, but find somebody you trust and spend half an hour talking about whether or not the thing is really going to help the world. So if you were willing to do that, I would love a show of hands. Because we've been talking about this for more than a year. And I see this as the first step to anything else that we can do. Okay, I don't know, maybe there's some conscientious abstainers there. Happy to talk about it afterwards. But let's do this. This is a data leadership conference. If we can't get our act together here, I'm not sure there's any hope for anybody. So let's take this step. Okay, the last thing here, let me up the ante just a little bit, is I think it's good to do this, but the additional step that we should take is we should do it and we should share it. We should talk about the fact that we are talking about ethics. So I don't mean that you should go out there and air all of your dirty laundry and say all of the worrisome things that came up in the review and all the potential things that could go wrong that would be terrible, terrible if the media got them and turned them into clickbait. Right? We don't need to go there, but share the fact that you're doing this. So that could be as simple as saying, hey, I did an ethics review. I'm happy about it. If you want to get a little more clever, you could share something you learned. So foreground detection can rule out accidental bystanders from facial recognition apps. That might be a thing that you learn in an ethics review. Share that. That's a cool thing to share. You might call out somebody who's been helpful to you or who taught you, or you might just say how you felt about it, but share it. And I'm suggesting Twitter here. It doesn't have to be Twitter, but share this in the community because this should be a norm. This is a thing, it's not hard to do, and every year there are now tens of thousands of data scientists being pulled out of PhDs somewhere or rolling out of boot camps, and I don't see any reason that we can't introduce them to a world where this is just the way it's done, where we think about and talk about the ethical implications of our work. Can I get another show of hands on that? If you raised your hand the first time, are you willing to share? Yeah? All right, I see a little more caution there, and given the talk this morning, the panel this morning, I can see reasons to be cautious, but find some way to share, whether it's Twitter or just coffee with friends. This is the thing that we should be doing. All right, let's recap really quickly. Algorithms are de facto gatekeepers to opportunity. I don't know if I said this strongly enough before, but this is the American dream that we're talking about. This is education and jobs and houses. Access to all of those things is more and more contingent on getting on the right side of a gatekeeping algorithm. So the stakes are high. All models are wrong, some are useful. Just because it's useful doesn't mean it's good. We need to raise the bar and use not just statistical standards, but ethical standards to evaluate our work. And then last, please, 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 if you raise your hand today, stick to it. Next time you launch a data product of any kind, conduct an ethics review and share it. Happy to continue the conversation afterwards. Thanks for your attention. And thanks, not quite the last word here, but this has been a fantastic program with just lots of wonderful ideas. So thank you for being here and thank you for participating. I think we've got a minute and a half for questions, if there are any questions or comments. Anybody want to pile on?
Hi, I have a question regarding the example that you showed us on the prediction, right, of recidivism. If you look at it, it feels like, okay, there's actually a way to control for factors outside your control. You can literally instrument for, like you can literally use propensity score to say, okay, I'm gonna control for propensity to commit crime again based on factors outside my control, and then predict, the chance of, recidivism. So it's like the tool is there, it's all doable, right? But in your opinion, like what, it's not, it's just grassroots, right? Will get you so far. But like how do you kind of get something that like will, commit people to doing these, right? Like on a much larger scale than individuals.
Mm-hmm. So I think I'm hearing two questions there. One is about propensity scores and teasing out the effects of things beyond your control. And then I didn't quite follow the second part.
So the first, they're kind of connected. So I'm saying that it seems like the tool is there, right? Even the example you give to say, okay, I can control for things outside my control. So not that be a factor of the decision, but how do you beyond a grassroots effort, right? Like what do you think are good ways for us to kind of have a big impact that actually would make needle moving differences?
Mm-hmm. So I mean on the first side. So on the first side, I love the idea of controlling for it. You're basically proposing a technical solution to this values-laden problem.
Yeah.
If you go down that route, I guarantee you that at some point somebody will start talking about affirmative action, and there will be a debate on both sides. I think that's a debate we should have, and I think statistics can probably help clarify what's at stake there in a lot of ways. On the second question about going beyond grassroots, so I think the first thing I'd say there is that there are not that many people who are creating algorithms in the world, right? There are maybe a few thousand, and so we've got 150 people in the room here. Like if we could each persuade 5 people to look at the world in a more ethical way, we could actually make a pretty big difference, right? It's not that huge of a community. If you want to do things outside of your own job or your own social influence, I think citizen science is a really good way to go. I think advocating for open data and transparent evaluation of algorithms, those are good avenues to pursue. But don't minimize what you can do sitting in the chair that you're already sitting in.
So Abe, this is a continuation of a topic that you and I think, took on just very briefly, but I wanted to throw it out publicly, and this is a big question. So is there an opportunity in these kind of risk scores to, in some sense, invert and create more opportunity? So when I think about risk scores, what I think about is fear, right? That the entities that are actually doing this are thinking about themselves and kind of curtailing their risk.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm just wondering, and I don't personally have an answer to this myself, but I want to throw it out, is there an opportunity through data science for those entities to learn more from their modeling about the people that they're rejecting, and thereby use that to actually essentially present alternatives that actually give them opportunity? So instead of kind of reining it in and trying to constrain the population and ultimately kind of the market size that they can respond to, but can they think through a reframing of the problem in a more expansive way?
Yeah, I think that's one of the places that thinking about the ethics behind models takes you. And you two should talk, because it sounds like you're thinking along a similar wavelength. But there's no reason, so right now, this model is mainly being connected up to one policy lever, which is parole, right? Do you get out or do you stay in jail? But there's absolutely no reason that it couldn't be connected to education programs or programs to help with mental health or, right, all kinds of rehabilitative things. Now, politically, I don't know if there's appetite for that in the US, but wow, like there's an opportunity there, right? And if you could show that, hey, this small population is likely to commit a second crime unless they get help from a psychiatrist, like, that would be fantastic. And I think there should be opportunities there.
And a quick question on if you've had the chance to do an ethical review on something that's already been in production and affected people, because it seems like that can get almost ethically murky, where you have harm that's already been applied, but then fixing that harm will then incur harm against the company and then hurt the people that work there.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Have you been in that situation by chance? There are examples of it in the research community where, like APT1 that Mandiant found, where there was a major attack. They had to sit on that for a year and a half before they were allowed to talk about it, while more harm was incurred.
Mm-hmm. I haven't personally encountered that, but it's a good question. I mean, do you have thoughts on how to navigate that kind of situation?
I think it should be brought up. I think it's very hard and difficult to solve, and it's quickly out of the realm of people that are in data science and quickly in the realm of the accountants and the people trying to save the company.
Yeah, I hear that. And again, I just want to say we ought to have a voice there, right?
So I think you absolutely hit the nail on the head with regard to the power algorithms have over people's lives in recent days. Now, the call for self-regulation, I think, is very appropriate. I think we should absolutely do that. But do you think that there should be any kind of governmental regulation or public oversight on something like this?
That's a really hard question. And it's a thing that I'm still kind of puzzling over the right answer to. I think it's going to depend on the domain. But I don't think that means that we shouldn't, how do you say this? I feel very comfortable saying that doing reviews ourselves is a necessary first step. If we do that, then we will be better equipped for those conversations as they start to arise. I suspect that sooner or later there is going to be a role for government in some of these areas. I mean, there already is in finance, in healthcare, in education. That's already regulated in a lot of ways. I think there are productive debates that we could have about how that regulation could be extended to other areas or reshaped to move those fields forward. But those are legitimately hard questions, and I'm not going to claim that I have the answer. All right, I think we're out of time. But I'd love to talk to you afterwards about this. This is not a conversation that's going to stop here. So let's keep it going. Thank you.